Testing. Oh, it's okay. Testing. Are we good? Oh, fantastic. Welcome to the third CTLA workshop in our communication series, Writing and Peer Feedback. We have presenting today Sherry Rysdam, Jenny Slinkard, and James Dyer, right? Yes. I don't know why I panicked thinking I got somebody's name wrong, but I didn't. I'd also like to remind everyone we did put a survey link in the calendar invite, and I will put it out also next week. Look for it in InfoLine. So with that, I'll let you go ahead.
Thanks. You guys have a mic? Okay, perfect. Okay. Yeah? Okay, fantastic. So we are going to start with a skit with our lovely participants. And I'll just let you take it away, okay? So the scene here is how peer workshopping or peer review happens. So I don't know. I use those terms interchangeably. I think James uses those terms interchangeably, but I'm not sure about others. So we're not going to be too pedantic about the difference between review and workshop. So this is what I see as like a common scenario of peer workshopping. So we have 4 students. River, who is a studious student who wants an A so bad they can taste it. We have Treevine, who is a quiet, shy student who doesn't like to speak up in class. Skycloud is an outspoken B- student who took an AP class. Aaron is nodding knowingly about this student. And then we have Mountain, who is a student who might not pass your class, probably won't pass your class, but doesn't really seem to mind. Okay? So we are getting into groups of 4 to do some peer review. Go ahead. Okay, everyone, get into a group of 4 and pass around your papers.
Okay, who wants to start? Okay, well, I can go first. Here's my paper. Okay, what did you think?
You misspelled there throughout and have lots of sentence fragments. I marked them all in red ink.
Oh, okay.
I didn't like your introduction. I think you could do that better. Your hook is boring.
All right.
Also, I don't understand paragraph 4. You should rewrite that part because it was super hard to understand.
Oh, okay. Well, what did you think, Mountain?
I thought it was really good.
Oh, thanks. What did you like about it?
Oh, I just thought the whole thing was great. I don't have any other comments.
Okay. What about you, Treevine?
Oh, it was really good.
Okay, so who's next?
Perfect. Yeah, so great job, guys. Did you find that peer workshopping session to be productive, River?
I feel pretty good about my paper. I don't really have a lot to do.
Yeah, fantastic. So I think this is, you're kind of nodding, right? You've seen this. There are challenges that peer review pop up during peer review. So this is why we're having this session. How do we get past this sort of cursory, oh yeah, maybe they read the paper, but they don't really know what to do. Some people think they know what to do, but actually they're not doing what we want them to do. They're not making comments about what we want them to make comments on, while another student might be just too shy to say anything at all. So I do have, some definitions here of peer review just to set the scene, that when we talk about peer review as scholars, We're talking about scientific work that's been reviewed by people of a similar kind of competence, a similar kind of expertise. And so that's the same thing. Like, that's what we're doing with peer review in our classes as well. And so seeing the students as peers, they have a similar level of expertise. There's something that they can gain and improve upon in that scenario. Yeah, and again, workshop equals review equals workshop equals review. I don't know the difference necessarily, or I'm not treating them differently. So I have just another couple set of warm-up questions here for you all. Do you do peer workshopping in your classes? Why or why not? What kinds of assignments do you peer workshop? How do you run your workshops? And what kinds of problems have you encountered? So we'll just do this really quickly if you want to pass it around and share what you have done.
Workshopping in every class because I think students benefit by seeing what other students are doing. So it's really more for, and to think critically about it. They're sometimes better at thinking critically about peer work than they are about their own. I workshop drafts and of like literary analysis, grant proposals, whatever we're writing, typically a formal assignment. I run the workshops by providing a framework. With lower division students, I often go criterion by criterion. So if we're working on thesis, we're all looking at the thesis at the same time together, and I'm giving them some direction. At the upper division, I give the students a framework and let them work independently in groups. Problems are typical. Like sometimes students, they just don't know what to say, or they focus on commas which are not relevant in the draft phase. I hardly ever have students who are too critical. So usually they're just too nice.
I do some workshopping in some of my classes, mainly those that are kind of digital storytelling oriented, which includes perhaps most relevantly kind of voiceover scripts and those types of things. I haven't used it a lot in kind of term papers, large projects, although with capstone projects, I do allow students to get in communication and share drafts on their own. Those are oftentimes online classes because they're upper division in the program. When I run workshops for the digital storytelling stuff, then everybody takes a turn and shares their work, and then we'll discuss it as a group rather than having, you know, one-on-one reviews, because oftentimes they're kind of short documents. And I don't think that I've run into any kind of problems, but I'm really interested in trying to figure out ways to expand peer review in other classes for larger projects and that type of thing.
No. I do have assignments where, I mean, I don't necessarily do peer workshops this year. Outsource work to get at this. I think because what we're really trying to get at is like practicing, you know, what peers are doing helps. I think when students see what students are doing, it helps them understand themselves and like relation to the other students' work. So even though I don't have like a formal, okay, now we're going to take time to review each other's work, but because we crowdsource each other, like for example, my borders immigration class, I have them do handouts on the chapters, and those handouts have to be distributed to everyone, and there's like people who sign up for different weeks, and so collectively we end up generating many handouts over the term, and of course there's some variation, and students are able to sort of, students know immediately like, oh, I kind of phoned that one in compared to the group A. Theirs was way better than ours, and like they internalize, I think, better by recognizing what they didn't do or did do, or the people who did really well are like, oh, we really, compared to the other people, we did great. So like, it's another way to, I think, get some of the same stuff, but just a little less, it's more implicit as opposed to explicit.
I think I already said this in the previous workshop that I do put them in pairs. I don't necessarily dedicate a whole class to a workshop, but, integrate it. And, I try to give them direction and instructions because I've had, you know, pair work where, they're just doing error corrections and so if I have one stronger Spanish speaker than the other, and so I try to direct them, say, to asking questions rather than, like, tell me more about this kind of, describe, or, it's just to prompt them, the other student, to write more, to explain better, rather than, get into correction mode. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks. You guys are, so we're done. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so here is some empirical reasons to do peer review in your class, to some degree at least. There is a ton of research that supports doing peer workshopping in class. Students self-correct more. This is what you're getting at, I think, Dustin, and make more meaningful revision compared to the revision that they make with the instructor feedback. So that, that makes me feel a little bit off the hook for giving as much feedback. I can outsource that to some degree to my students because they're still going to make meaningful revisions. There's also research that suggests that giving feedback is better than receiving it. So students who have no feedback on their own work actually made more and more meaningful revision to their own writing than those who only received feedback, who didn't read any other papers. They just got feedback on their own work. So yeah, again, being exposed and seeing what is working and not working on other people's papers or other people's work is really meaningful for making those self-corrections. And not even corrections, like beyond corrections, right? Just self-edit, self-review. All levels of students can benefit from peer review. So from the lowest developmental writing students to the highest, I mean, we know this, we are publishing scholars. We know that we benefit from feedback, right? And from reading other people's work, definitely. So if you want my citations, there they are. Yeah, so in a nutshell, we want students to become experts. We don't want them to rely on us and instructors always telling them what to do. We want them to become, their own self-sufficient. Oh, I can do this on my own. I'm going to find ways to do that, both with reading and with writing. So this, I'm going to go really very quickly. All of these points kind of showed up in this skit. You can see that the drawbacks, a lot of people avoid doing peer workshopping because of these things. It can be hard. Students focus on different criteria than you want them to. They're too accepting of low-level work or work that doesn't meet your expectations. They don't always give adequate advice. They might focus on, this is kind of the same as that first bullet point, but they might focus on those surface level corrections, and they're usually wrong. Thank you, thank you. And then some students trust their teacher more than their classmates. So even if they get good feedback, they don't always implement it because they don't trust it. They don't see their peer as being smart enough to do it. And here are all the, the rebuttals to those drawbacks. That before you start a workshopping session, you can remind students what it is that you expect. So when I am doing peer review, I start with the assignment that they're working on. And I say, remember, this is your goal, this is what you're doing, so that students have that fresh in their mind, and they're not just saying, oh yeah, I like this, even though it's not connected to what we've actually done in class. You can also identify the specific things that you want them to focus on. So if it is a longer project, maybe during peer workshopping, you just have them focus on one thing. They're not looking for everything in every session. They can do just, isolated focuses, foci. Yeah, remind them to be critical but kind. So who was it? Sky Cloud was pretty critical and wasn't super kind. But Mountain was really just too kind and not critical enough, unwilling to give any kind of revision-focused feedback. I also really like to remind students that they are in charge of their own paper, and they don't have to accept the feedback they get on it. They don't even have to accept my feedback, right? Like, I can make suggestions, but ultimately they own the work. I also, though, remind students that they are not their work, and so if we are critiquing it, I try to say, okay, you need to be distanced from this. We're not critiquing you, the writer, we're critiquing this, the writing. And kind of explicitly saying these are separate things can help students say, like, okay, yeah, they're not talking about me, I can revise this and make good writing. Yeah, and just have faith in them, like, they're smart kids and smart grown-ups. Yeah, so now we're gonna move into some just talking about how we've done peer workshopping. I do peer workshopping in a lot of different ways. So one of my really favorite ways to do it is with speed dating. And I have students line up facing peers, you know, depending on what the classroom looks like. I set a timer and I have them share a specific element of writing for them to read and discuss with their date, with their speed dater. You know, 2 minutes, and then the Chewbacca roars, that's the alarm I have. So Chewbacca roars through the whole class, and I say, okay, switch. Then they switch, the other person goes, they talk about that, and then when Chewbacca roars again, everybody shifts. And so then we might do it again, you know, if we're talking about their thesis statement in my writing classes, maybe they talk about thesis statement with 2 people, and then we talk about something else. So they read a different portion of their paper, and that might take, you know, it might take the whole class, or it might just take 30 minutes. You could do that one thing if you just need students to get up and move, can be really fun. Workshopping stations is kind of similar to speed dating, but here they have a longer time, and they get to choose what they want to prioritize. So I might have like a thesis workshop over here, organizing workshop over there, somebody else who still needs to work on expansion and development over there. And so I might have materials set up, but students go there with their writing and critique the papers that are available there on that, get feedback on their own writing. When the timer goes up, then they can prioritize, okay, I'm gonna go talk to these other peers next. So again, students are moving around, but they have a little bit more autonomy, and they're thinking about what their priorities are. Of course, I'm talking here about in-person classes. I think Sherry's gonna mostly talk about online classes. I didn't put my online classes on here, but I could talk about that too if I need to. Another way I do it is anonymized student writing. So here is after students have submitted work, I remove their names, and the whole class would look at the same papers. So together, we're critiquing this particular piece of writing. What do you like about this? What do you not like about this? And that, I really like doing that, especially early in the term, because it helps them see, like, oh, this is what her expectations are. It allows me to talk about it more directly. And grounded in this piece of work.
Would you take a paper written by a former student then to do that?
No, I haven't done it that way. I have done it with work that was somebody else's paper who wasn't in class. What I would normally do, though, is have current students work in there, because then they can hear the feedback that's about their paper. They're doing it and hearing it.
And do you ask permission of that person?
I wouldn't say I ask permission. I tell students at the beginning of class, you're going to be sharing your work. This is public, you know, you're producing work for this class, and this is a part of the class. So I wouldn't say I ask permission, but I allow for them to say, please don't choose my work. That they don't really usually care in my classes. They're not writing personal narratives and things like that. Yeah. I have had students say, yeah, please don't choose my work, and I just don't then. And then the other one, my last one is this, like, I think maybe traditional exchange your papers, but I try to avoid this scenario by having them work on specific things. And I usually have an assignment attached, like a physical handout. They are writing, feedback on it. And I usually will try to somehow get the feedback that they have given so that I can at least see what kinds of feedback the students are getting from people that aren't me. That's not the only ways I do it, but James is going to talk about better ways to do workshopping.
I don't know about all that. So this is an idea that a colleague and I came up with as we were working through our own peer review trauma. We had submitted something to a journal and gotten that typical, it's what reviewer 2 comments that everyone hates. And we were thinking, man, like, wouldn't this be so much better if we could actually have a dialogue with this reviewer and explain to them, like, hey, you're focusing on this part of our manuscript, but like, here's where we really want you to go. So we decided, wouldn't this be nice to actually like apply to our own peer workshops that we do in class? So essentially we started doing these workshops as starting with student interviews. Because workshops can be a huge drag sometimes, even though they have a lot of educational benefit for students. I find there are like maybe 1 or 2 students who are really, really excited about like sharing their work and getting feedback on their work. And then a lot of students either fall into that like kind of too nice category or sometimes that too mean category. What we like to do to start, instead of just having students read and red pen it, is to have them interview each other to figure out what specifically they wanted their classmates to focus on. So to spice things up, I have my students typically read through their partner's papers first. And then before they mark anything down, I want them to write down questions that they want to ask their partner whose paper they're reviewing before they actually red pen the thing. If you want to get really wild, I would have my students treat this as like a celebrity style interview. This is because I'm the only one who takes my class seriously, probably. It's really fun to do it that way. I didn't know that was going to be in there. So some examples that I have of these questions that I've written for my students to kind of get them started, like, whammo, your paper just became famous. And I would ask my student, why do you think your paper deserves this acclaim? Often it makes them uncomfortable at the start. But if you actually commit to making them think about this, they will pretty consistently give you what they really think is great about their paper. Similarly, it's always important to ask about challenges that students are having in writing these things, just to get things on the table. For example, if a student says, commas are a huge challenge for me, then this creates, I think, a space where a student can freely give that comma or like minuscule grammar feedback in a way where it's like a give and take, rather than like the punishment thing I think grammar feedback typically manifests as. Some student celebrity interview examples that I really appreciated. Students started asking about this thing called an aha moment, which was a phrase that I would use in my classes as we were going through readings. And then this is one that I would always leave off my list for some reason, even though it's pretty obvious. A student says, well, I just want to tell my classmate what I want them to look at. And these are some questions that they actually asked during this stage. So I think Sherry's got a couple more.
Thank you. I like the celebrity interview question. It strikes me that a lot of times it's a genre issue, and they probably spend a lot more time, most writers have spent a lot more time listening to Oprah's aha moment questions than they have with peer review, but it achieves the same thing, right? Talking through it in this way. So I love that. So my examples here are just basic, what I think of as really basic ways to do peer review or workshop. I often interchange them as well in online classes or through Canvas. So, and I don't know if this is relevant or not, but I think with discussion boards and more discussion-based approaches in groups of 4, that I tend to call that more of a workshop. And then in sort of the Canvas peer review feature, I'm more likely to call that peer review. So if has anybody used the Canvas peer review feature? A couple of people. I don't know if I trained the machine or the machine trained me, but I feel like that feature has gotten a lot better since I first started trying to use it about 15 years ago or whenever I started teaching online. So I would encourage you, if you integrate a rough draft in your cycle of assignments, to play around with that peer review feature. You can give it, the students upload their rough draft, and then you can automatically assign 2 students, 3 students to a draft, and it just happens automatically. Then when they click on the assignment, they see the students' drafts that they need to peer review. And then they have the same features that we have on Canvas. So they can use the tools to highlight, to make in-text comments, to underline things, to draw. And then they can also leave end comments in the assignment comment section or just on the draft of the paper. And then I can see when I'm providing feedback on that draft what their peers have already covered, and it's a really nice process. I usually ask for the peer review for students to write both in-text feedback and end comment. I've tried it both ways, and it seems like it's more substantive when they are digging into the draft and stepping back and doing sort of an overall end comment. If they just do an end comment, it tends to be more superficial, similar to what our example at the beginning of this presentation, where it may just be sort of like, great job, keep up the good work, I liked your essay, or yeah, that's it mostly. That's the most common thing. But if they're asked to interact with the text a little, dig in a little, get to some specifics, it seems like the end comment can be more substantive as well. So again, if you want to experiment with integrating that into your Canvas course, it's a typical assignment. And then when you scroll down through all your assignment options, you'll see a peer review option. You can click it and it will take you through more to just set that up online asynchronously. And then the other way that I do peer review in my online classes is through discussion boards. And so typically this might be really informal, where they just type or copy and paste into the text of the discussion board but oftentimes they are uploading a Word doc or linking to a Google Doc. And then students can reply and provide feedback in the discussion board. And this can get a little bit messy, and I think it's most effective when they upload a doc or link to a Google Doc, provide their comments in suggesting mode and save it, or using track changes in Word, save it and link it and attach it in the discussion post. So it gets a little bit messy, but what I like about the discussion board is that it's a panopticon where they can see everybody's drafts if they want to take the time to look through these rough drafts and see, how they might improve based on reviewing those. They can see the kind of feedback that other people have received, and just get a sense of how all of this works, especially if they feel new to this system, new to peer review. I think for teaching it, it just takes scaffolding. I'm sure many of us feel like the term sort of gets away from us, and then papers are due and we don't have time. We don't have time to go back. And so really intentionally making a rough draft due 2 weeks before a final draft to give students time to review the work. In my classes, I always emphasize that rough drafts can be really rough, even an outline maybe, just something, right? Let's get those ideas started. but frequently if they know it's peer review, if they know peers are going to be looking at it, they submit something that's a little bit more finished. It's, again, that peer pressure can be effective in that positive way. So that was my main point about the online teaching peer review. So should I pass it back to you, Jenny? I think we just have time now to talk about like challenges maybe that we haven't talked about, or things that you want to riff off of here and tell me how to do peer review better. I was thinking of, you know, some other challenges that I've had that maybe I didn't even talk about those because they're things I haven't really figured out yet. But how do you, and this came to mind specifically, Sherry, when you were talking about doing things, assigning them to peer review somebody and putting them in groups. Just last term, I did that in my online upper division English class and grammar. And one of my groups totally failed. They were in groups of 4. I think one person submitted their paper. The other 3 did not submit their paper. So I shuffled groups and put that one person in with other groups. But, you know, now it's been like a couple days late. And now, so I've got one person who hasn't received any feedback. I've got 2 people who've already given feedback. And it just gets really messy. Like if they come to class, but they don't have a draft. Or they come to class and they have a draft, but it's on their computer and their computer is dead. What do you do? So like that kind of like managing. Yay! Angela has the answer.
I don't know if I have the answer, but I've dealt with it a lot. So when they come to class and they don't have a draft, I give them the opportunity to sit with, be the third wheel in a group, right? So they're still hearing the conversation. They can still participate in the conversation. Unfortunately, their work is not being reviewed. So then I have to figure out how do I handle then this student's work not being reviewed, because at least they're participating in the class activity, but then their work isn't being reviewed. So a couple of things. If I have a student absent, they get paired up, and they, on their own time, I give them have them do it via Google Docs so I can see the real-time kind of interaction typically. If no one was absent and then we have someone hanging out, I will sometimes ask if anyone would like to review someone else's paper, an extra paper. That sometimes will be a really good strategy, because someone will there's always someone. And I teach future teachers. So you know how they are. Like, I want to do it. So sometimes if that doesn't work, I will ask, I will do it for you, but you're going to get limited. You have to tell me what part of the paper you'd like me to review. So they have to come with questions prepared as to what they want me to review, because I'm not going to grade the assignment and then have them actually do the assignment for me to regrade the assignment, right? So they have to come with something specific, not just a carte blanche, I'm going to go through the whole paper for them. So that's what I've started doing over the last 25 years that I've been doing this, and that seemed to help a little bit. And I do the same thing if like the laptop's dead. I mean, if my cord happens to fit your laptop, for sure borrow it. If you can pull it up on someone else's device, great. That's why I always recommend Google Docs, because you can at least log in somewhere. So those are some of the things that I've done with students. Yeah.
As an undergraduate, I had a history course where we had to do peer review all the time. And the professor made your grade contingent on getting feedback on your paper. So if you turn in a paper that didn't have any feedback written on the back side, you didn't get full points. And so, and he also wasn't afraid to just be like, well, how often are you going to show up unprepared? And just kind of let students sit with that shame a little bit, which I think can be a productive feeling. So, but yeah, having this idea of like, even if they show up unprepared, they can still give feedback on someone else's paper and let someone else achieve their full points, and then they kind of, and it goes back to this idea of like they kind of are like, okay, now they're doing work still and helping someone else get the full grade, but now they're not going to get the full grade because they didn't bring their paper to get feedback on. So it's like there's a mechanism there to like, yep, you still have to do the work, but now you just don't get full points. And so it's like, why should, which is better than skipping class altogether because you also get graded on, you had to give feedback and get feedback. So like, there's working in incentive structures to like, you better show up prepared, otherwise you're just not going to get full points. And maybe, I guess that Sky Cloud doesn't really care, or Mountain doesn't really care, but
When I'm working with students on campus, I have them submit their drafts in Canvas. And then I print them and make copies and put students in groups based on the number of drafts I have. And so if I have a class of 15 and I have 10 drafts, I can create 5 groups of 2 with drafts, and then I can add the third wheel one on to that. But I found that if I don't like students to work on the screen with each other in the classroom, so I like paper. And if I delegate to them to bring the paper, they don't bring the paper, so then everything is snafu'd by having to go to the computer lab in the middle of class and la 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 la. But I think I do like having students see other students' work, even if they don't have something to work, even if they're not bringing a draft, because sometimes that just being able to visualize what this assignment is supposed to do, they can handle that during class.
I was going to sneak in and say the other thing about screen versus paper, if they do have a screen, any draft they have to read out loud to their partner, because then they're also catching their own errors or opportunities for fixing.
Yeah, my writing 115 students really rebelled with our first papers a couple of weeks ago when I told them that, and I was like, well, yeah, you have to read your paper out loud because you're going to hear things. And then I tried to say, some of them were like, I'm not doing that. And then I was like, well, okay, so you don't necessarily have to read your own paper, but somebody has to read the paper out loud. It could be the same reader, right? If you don't feel comfortable reading out loud, somebody's going to read it out loud. And I think in upper division classes, that little bit of shaming works fantastic. In my writing 115 class, it doesn't work. They're like, oh, I don't belong here, I'm not coming back. Right. And that's definitely not the goal. So it's like working around that. I need to motivate them and empower them without making them feel bad for not having come to class prepared. Were you going to add to that, Jill? Or
Just a couple things. I'm really glad to hear that others are struggling with some of the same issues. One, the paper copy. I do request that they bring in hard copies for for a specific reason, but this business of screens and hiding behind the screens, I like the idea of reading out loud too, and I'm regretting not doing that today, as a matter of fact. So today they were supposed to have their dialogues prepared, and of course only a few of them were. So I ended up, I had like 5 students, and I think 3 were prepared. So I put the other one, one to help the other one, and then another one was prepared with another assignment. So I ended up working with them, but then that took me away from helping the group. So so it's tricky when they don't all come prepared. And then just one other thing that I remembered from last year, I had a student who was actually a writing tutor, and she turned in a paper that I was really surprised by, and I just ended up turning the situation around and say, well, what would you say if somebody came to you with this paper? What would you tell them? And so that worked, I think, to do that. So.
The reading out loud comment reminds me of an activity I sometimes do, which is to, when they have their drafts, have everyone read out loud at the same time. So they start reading and they read all the way through, and then if your essay is short or if you finish early, start back over to create that sound, and it creates this loud noise. And I mean, because reading a paper out loud, we know is helpful, and you catch all things that you don't catch when you're reading it quietly. But then reading it out loud with just a bunch of noise in the background, it doesn't work for all students, but for many, it creates sort of a real focus. You know, you have to drown out, you have to really focus on the words that are on the page, and that can be really effective as well.
And I think sometimes when you start doing that, when it's not a final paper, when you start at the beginning, like a small paragraph or a small assignment, that you can build up to that. So it's something that's not high stakes in the beginning, right? That you're reading out loud, so it becomes very comfortable and you're building this culture and community in your classroom, that then it becomes easier once you get to these bigger assignments. And my favorite is when they come back and they're like, oh, it works. I'm like, oh, I know.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's what I love about the speed dating, because it's both that, like the din, everybody is talking at once. So there's that they don't feel so conspicuous. And there is also the time limit. So if they're really uncomfortable, guess what? You only have to talk to this person for 2 minutes, and then you're going to move on. But you're going to have to talk. And even if they are reluctant, you know, it gets a little, they get tired, I think, sometimes. Some classes really love it and want to keep going, and others are just, I can hear that the conversation stops sooner the longer we go, and that's when I stop and we do something else. So I just had some other questions I wrote on here, but feel free to say, oh, I have this question. This is open discussion. My little birds are gone. So it says how to prepare very differently prepared students. So that I'm thinking about maybe not necessarily students who haven't come prepared at all, but students who are like somebody has an outline, somebody has a finished draft, or somebody is doing really well with the material and somebody is really struggling with the material. Since I mostly only do the developmental writing classes on campus, this happens a lot. And getting a group of evenly matched students who are all kind of in a same place with good matched personalities. So I've read, things about matching students in groups too, that can have a really heavy impact on the dynamic of the group. Yeah, so I don't know. Am I the only one?
Nope. I don't want to talk so much, but I think that's where we work on our differentiation skills, right? So it's like looking at where we meeting students where they are, and looking at, okay, what are the needs of these students who are coming in with outlines versus students who have polished papers. And so how can I look at, we get to know our students pretty well, right? And so by probably week 3 of a 10-week term, we know who's coming in pretty prepared and who's coming in and needs more assistance. So setting that up ahead of time to decide, am I going to split students in groups and work with an outline group for 15 minutes of today's lesson and let other students kind of work together and start some peer editing? Am I going to partner students up and say, outlines and a final draft, like let's start looking at this and see how this outline could turn into a more polished draft? So things like, so you can set those groups up in so many different ways to look at where the need is for the students without saying, oh, you need to work with this expert. So sometimes putting, right, your most struggling with your highest achieving is not the right way to go, right? You want to look for those mid levels to like really pump each other up and find out where the strengths are. And so just taking some time, and also maybe not spending the entire course, that class session on that, because then you've got all this uncomfortableness. And of course I never, probably none of us do, but I don't surprise them with like, oh, we're peer editing today, or you need to have this done. Like, if you're at this point, try to get to this point, or this point. So if there's 2 different options or 3 different options of where they can get to, that way I can plan for what those options are, and I know what I can do with students to get them to the next phases, right? It's more planning. That's okay.
That fits really nicely with my state. I call it stations. We're doing stations because then I can go and sit in one station, right? And I can say, okay, you, and you, you're going to start in this station with me, and we're going to do this. And then maybe then I let them go to other stations or something like that. But it just, yeah, to give the other students something to do that's productive.
Just briefly, in defense of the surprise peer workshop, um, one of the things, and again, probably not the best
No
approach.
shame.
One of the things I had to figure out really early, I had a colleague who, like, had the same problem. I was like, all these students are coming to my workshops unprepared, or they're not coming at all. And my colleague, she said, well, like, if they don't come prepared, then they're out of class that day. Like, they're absent from class that day. That was the expected behavior from her. If you don't have your paper, don't come to class. And I had to really wrestle with that. Like, is that the behavior that I want from my students? If my students aren't doing their work or aren't able to do their work for some reason, like, why, like, what do I expect them to do in class? Do I want them to come to class? And I figured that I did want them to come to class. What I've found is it's not surprise workshop like pop quiz. They have a due date, and I found that I have more students will come if they like conveniently have forgotten that there's going to be a peer workshop that day that like didn't do the work. Then that gives me a chance to actually sit down with folks rather than have like a big scary peer workshop deadline where if I don't have the paper done, I wouldn't go to class. Like, yeah.
And you know, the other thought is, what if a student just needs 15 or 20 minutes to sit and work on it?
Yeah,
Because they
like,
need, we call it the calming goat. Like I don't know if you guys have seen the movie, but you sit next to that person and just help them chill out and get through those moments of like, maybe they just need that. Maybe there hasn't been that moment for them to actually get through some of that work, and they just need to be able to look at you and say, am I doing it right? Is this the right way? And you're like, yes, just keep going, keep going. So maybe that's one of those groups, right? And I'm like you, I'd rather have them there than not have them
100%.
there.
And like,
Come to class.
It
come to
sucks
class.
to have to
I will
manage-
teach you something, I promise.
It
We'll
sucks
get
a
there.
lot. Like, it's
Yeah.
hard to manage a class that way. To have workshoppers on one side and like, you know, help students out on the other side. But at the end of the day, I think would rather have those students in class than not. Yeah. So maybe not full surprise peer workshop, but yeah, lower the stakes however I can. Yeah.
In my composition classroom, I often have a writing workshop every week. So sometimes it's students come in and I check in with each of them and ask them what they're working on today, and then they get started. And so sometimes they want to meet with me, sometimes they want to share work with each other, sometimes they want to work independently, sometimes they need to go to the library, so we check in, and then at the end of class I check their work in and I give them credit for getting stuff done. So I have to know kind of like where they're starting and what the plan is and what they're going to get done, and then I hold them accountable for having done it. So sometimes that sort of diversification is nice, and to have an opportunity of like protected work time in my classroom, because sometimes life is too busy and it's hard to concentrate outside class.
I love getting them out of the classroom for a workshop. That's such a good idea. Like, yeah.
This also reminds me that, of course, I have to mention the Writing Center, but that is a form of peer, review, and students can always go there and get a reader. They're likely going to be reading their draft out loud. The tutor will likely prompt them to do that, and so, and then of course they're guided through with questions. So that can be a really helpful experience too. And one of the things that I think has been hard for me to implement with the tutors is that giving them space and time to actually write, giving the students that they're working with. Oftentimes I have students who I just think, this is a short discussion post. I just want you to share your thoughts. And they've got a lot of reasons why they just can't get it done and they just can't click reply. And so sitting with a tutor and saying, okay, let's try. Let's try to complete this in this 30-minute period and click reply before you leave today and get it done. So I think that can be really helpful as well. But, assigning peer tutoring or giving extra credit for it, I always make it an assignment and before a draft is due, and I have them either submit their blue slip or their client report form, which is the proof of tutoring, and just as a way to help them work with their drafts, revise their drafts, and get that peer exchange experience. Other thoughts?
Did you say you wanted me to do the last question? Oh, well, I think the last one's a good one. This question: how do we review students' feedback for appropriateness? I take that to mean, like, how do we make sure our students are giving respectful feedback? Is that kind of?
Yeah, because like I said, I think at the beginning, I outsource a lot of my feedback now that I have heavy loads, right? I choose which drafts and which papers I'm going to give substantive feedback on, and then I'm going to do peer review and let them workshop their paper like together, especially with upper division students. And yeah, sometimes I'm wondering, are they leaving good comments? Are they leaving comments that are kind and critical and revision driven? Are they pointing their peer in a direction that is going to give them, help them meet my expectations? I don't want to police them, right? I don't want to necessarily police them. I do give them grades, credit for leaving feedback, and I do read the feedback. I find that when I do that, that actually takes me more time than if I had just given feedback myself. But especially for that grammar class, there were a lot of teachers in there, and yeah, I think that's really important that they're getting feedback on their feedback. So I don't know, that's a really long-winded clarification. Does that make sense?
Kind of a related question, and it probably comes more from editorial experience and peer review teaching. What if you have peer reviewers that are giving different feedback and even diametrically opposed feedback? Like, how do you respond to those students that are like, well, this person's telling me this and this person's telling me that? So just
well, and like we did we did peer review prep today in my 115 class, and we talked about that very scenario, and they came up with really good ideas. They were like, well, you can ask River to like what they think about it, right? From this scenario, you can ask another peer. You could go to the writing center and see what they think about it. So you can kind of like get a bunch more and then choose the one that is the most. And then my response was, you can also make the decision on your own. Like, what do you think? You're also an expert. You are equally matched. You can decide what you want to do with it. I think that is really important to me, for the student to see ownership in their work. Like, oh yeah, this is going to be my work, not just a hodgepodge of other people leaving me feedback.
How much of all of this, just each of your different experience with peer review, how much of this is like situated in the context of a rubric or something? Meaning,
Of a what? Sorry.
like a rubric or something? Because peer review is useful, but also like, they're not experts yet. They're at best they're clumsy and inept. Not be that useful, unless there's like a rubric to be like, then that way they can like correlate, like, oh, you haven't actually done this thing that the rubric's asking you to do. Is that part of your guys' process, or is it just like kind of free willy, like,
I love this question because it is in line with an argument that I want to make to folks. Like, why should we be doing peer review?
Right.
I think that's where the question is. I come from an education background. That's why my doctorate is. So I haven't taken an English class in a minute. They did things peer review a lot differently. They actually would print out the rubric for the assignment, surprise peer review actually, and the teacher would leave the room for like 45 minutes and say, you guys are going to work together to make sure as many people get an A as possible.
Yeah.
And he would pass out the rubric, everyone would read papers, and that was the reframing of the feedback now, where how can we get, you know, Rivers to an A when the paper they've come up with by the rubric would be a C.
Right.
And it gives kind of some like objective measure as well.
Right.
It's not as like a friendly a process, and I think it's maybe not the, I think it's a more economical process though if you don't have a ton of time, which I think a lot of folks in different disciplines are dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
And it could be the case though, like I think another cool exercise I've done a couple times is I actually have students create the rubric, which is like,
hell yeah.
you guys come up, like, what would you expect to see in a good paper? And it's actually surprising. Again, it goes back to, I think there's so much power in peer pressure around like, because once one student's like, well, we should have this, and like, well, okay, and then like, and pretty soon, like, then they end up building like a system of like, okay, we're gonna all hold each other accountable to like this thing, but they might all agree like, let's not really mark each other on like spelling and grammar too much. Like that's less important than the substance or something, right? And so working in this capacity for them to be creative with what they're actually checking or like, you know, critiquing or looking for, kind of it weaves in more than just like, it's more bi-directional or multi-directional, which I think is more useful overall, like in some, you know, internalization process.
Yeah, I was gonna say mine is always connected to either the rubric or the assignment sheet. So I don't always have like an analytical rubric, you know, with points attached, but it's always articulated on the assignment sheet. Kind of thinking about having students do their own rubric, and this is more in the assessment range, not necessarily peer workshopping, but something that I have done maybe not super well, was I allowed students to assign the percentage for each category of the different on an analytical rubric. So they could say, no, I want you to score my content really, really low because this paper sucks. But I know that my mechanics and my organization is really good, and so you can score those high. So, you know, I would give them ranges, but that, I thought that it was nice too that students could have some autonomy and wiggle room and like building expertise while also recognizing that they're not good at everything quite yet. And they might value things differently than I do. Yeah, it's really tricky, I think, especially in freshman first year composition, because like they're really not experts and they know it, and you ask them, you know, well, what do you want me to focus on? What kind of feedback do you want? I don't know. Like they don't even know what they don't know. So having too much freedom is paralyzing, and especially in those classes. Yeah, yeah.
I just want to repeat something that I said at the workshop last week, which is there's this old National Writing Project article called Black Ninja Fish. And I keep returning to it because it's been really helpful to me. It's about teaching kindergartners to provide peer feedback. And of course, the kindergarten classroom has a whole year. But we have 10 weeks, and I think the key elements of the article for me were that students don't know how to do this, and so we have to train them. And so one way to do that is gradual release. And I think Angela was talking about having some low stakes assignments to start off with. So students are working with paragraphs, or they're working with in-text, you know, in-class writing or free writes, or, you know, things that are pretty casual. Or they're getting together to talk about the assignment, what they think they might want to do. Starting off there, or starting out, and I've also asked allowed to actually give feedback, right? So they read it out loud, just say thank you, that's it. And then the next time they're ready to give feedback, they're eager to actually have a chance to say something. So you kind of like stop them from saying something so that they want to say more later. So maybe you can thank the first week, you can praise the second week, and by the third week we're ready to give critique.
thinking. Did that make it on there? Speaking of thinking. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank
That's
you.
all, folks. Goodbye, good luck, and good night.